Hey Reddit, I'm Mark, 43, and the family I spent 10 years building just shattered around me. I raised my wife's kids like they were my own, paid for everything, supported their dreams, and loved them with all my heart. But one sentence changed everything. You're just some guy mom married. I should have walked away right then and there. But what they didn't know was that my decision to step back would unravel their lives in ways they never saw coming. And this time, I wasn't the one left picking up the pieces. When I first married Lisa, I knew her kids would be part of the package. Ethan was 7 and Sophie was 5. Their dad had never been in the picture, moved across the country after the divorce, and rarely called. So when I stepped in, I was determined to give those kids the love and stability they deserved. I showed up for every school recital, every soccer game, every scraped knee and late-night nightmare. I wasn't just their mom's husband. I was dad. At least that's what I thought. But kids grow up, and sometimes they forget what you've done for them. The day it all fell apart started like any other. It was a Saturday afternoon, and we were prepping for a family barbecue. I was outside setting up the grill, trying to get the damn propane tank to cooperate, while Ethan and Sophie sat nearby, glued to their phones. Hey, Ethan, give me a hand with the chairs, will you? I called over my shoulder. He didn't look up. In a minute, I bit back my frustration. Sophie, can you grab the cooler from garage? She let out an exaggerated sigh, her eyes still locked on her screen. Ugh, why can't you do it? I took a deep breath, forcing myself to stay calm. Come on, guys. I'm trying to get everything ready here. That's when Ethan muttered the words that hit harder than any punch I'd ever taken. Why do you care so much? It's not like you're our real dad. My grip on the grill tongs tightened until my knuckles went white. What did you just say? You heard me, he mumbled without looking up. Before I could respond, Sophie chimed in, her voice laced with that teenage blend of sarcasm and indifference. Yeah, you're just mom's husband, not our actual dad. I stared at them, my pulse hammering in my chest. I've been raising you both for 10 years. 10 years of driving you to practice, paying for your school trips, putting food on this table. How can you say that? Ethan shrugged. We didn't ask you to. Lisa appeared in the doorway, eyes wide as she took in the scene. Ethan, Sophie, how can you say that to Mark? Neither of them answered. They just exchanged a look, the kind of silent agreement only siblings share, and then turned back to their phones as if I were nothing more than background noise. I couldn't breathe. The air felt too thick, the weight of their words pressing down on my chest. Without another word, I set down the tongs, walked past Lisa, and headed inside. I grabbed my keys off the counter and left the house, the sound of their laughter trailing behind me like a slap to the face. I drove aimlessly for hours, my thoughts spinning in a loop. I thought about the nights I'd stayed up helping Ethan with his science projects, the weekends I'd spent driving Sophie to gymnastics meets, the countless sacrifices I'd made to give them a good life. And for what? To be told I was just their mom's husband? By the time I pulled back into the driveway that night, the anger had settled into something colder, something final. Lisa was waiting for me in the living room, her eyes red from crying. Mark, they didn't mean it. They're just kids. Teenagers say things they don't understand. I sank onto the couch, rubbing my hands over my face. Lisa, I've given everything to this family. I worked overtime to pay for their sports, their trips, their clothes. I've shown up for every birthday, every holiday, every stupid PDA meeting. And tonight, they made it clear that none of that matters. She reached for my hand. It does matter. They're just... No. I cut her off, my voice hard. They meant what they said. And I can't keep pouring my heart into a family that doesn't see me as family. Tears welled in her eyes. So what are you saying? You're leaving? I looked into the eyes of the woman I'd loved for over a decade and felt my chest tighten. I don't know, I admitted, but something has to change. I can't keep being the guy who gives everything and gets nothing in return. For the next few weeks, I kept my distance. I stopped offering to drive the kids to their activities, stopped paying for their extras. I covered the essentials, food, utilities, the mortgage, but nothing more. At first, they didn't seem to notice. Ethan still expected his soccer fees to be paid, and Sophie still dropped her online shopping carts in my inbox like nothing had changed. But when Ethan's coach called to ask why his tournament fees hadn't been paid, and Sophie's friends started getting their prom dresses while she still hadn't ordered hers. The cracks started to show. "Why didn't you pay the soccer fees?" Ethan demanded one night, standing in the doorway of my home office. I didn't look up from my laptop. "Because I'm not your dad, remember? Just mom's husband." His face turned red. "That's not fair. You're supposed to." "I'm supposed to what?" I interrupted, finally meeting his eyes. "Keep giving while you take me for granted?" "Sorry, Ethan. Those days are over." Sophie was next. She cornered me in the kitchen a few days later, her arms crossed tightly over her chest. "I need money for my prom dress." I leaned back against the counter, arms crossed. "Ask your mom. She doesn't have the money. You always pay for this stuff." "Not anymore." Her eyes flashed with anger. "So you're just going to let me be the only one without a dress? If I'm just some guy mom married, then it's not my responsibility, is it?" Her mouth opened and closed, but no words came out. She spun on her heel and stormed out of the kitchen, slamming the door behind her. Lisa begged me to reconsider. She said I was punishing the kids to prove a point. But it wasn't about punishment. It was about boundaries, about respect. I'd spent a decade giving everything to a family that saw me as nothing more than a wallet. That wasn't a family. That was a transaction, and I was done paying the bill. I thought that would be the end of it, that I'd quietly step back and life would go on. But I underestimated how much my absence would change everything. Because when you take away the person who holds everything together, the cracks start to show. And what happened next? Let's just say, karma has a way of showing up when you least expect it. You know that moment when you realize the world doesn't revolve around you? Yeah, Ethan and Sophie were about to have that moment. Hard. After I stopped footing the bill for everything, things started falling apart faster than I expected. Ethan's soccer coach called again, this time to tell him he couldn't play in the tournament because the fees hadn't been paid. Sophie's friends started posting pictures of their prom dresses on social media while she still hadn't picked one out. And suddenly, the attitude shifted. "Mark, can we talk?" Lisa asked one evening as I sat in the living room with my laptop. I glanced up briefly. "About what?" "The kids," she said, sitting beside me. "They're struggling. Ethan's devastated about soccer, and Sophie's been crying about prom. Can't you just help them this once?" I closed my laptop slowly, taking a deep breath to keep my voice steady. "Lisa, I've been helping them this once for 10 years. I've paid for their sports, their clothes, their trips, everything. And how do they thank me? By telling me I'm just some guy you married." "They didn't mean it," she insisted. "They meant every word," I replied. "And until they realize the value of what I've done for them, I'm done playing the role of ATM." Lisa's eyes filled with tears. "But they're kids." "No, Lisa, they're old enough to know better." I stood up and walked away before the argument could continue. The next day, I overheard Ethan and Sophie arguing in the kitchen. "This is your fault," Sophie snapped. "If you hadn't said that crap about him not being our real dad, none of this would have happened." "Oh, please," Ethan shot back. "You said it too." "Yeah, but you started it. And now I can't even go to prom because of you." "Whatever. At least you're not getting benched from soccer." I leaned against the wall, listening silently. Funny how their tune changed the moment their free ride disappeared. A week later, things hit a new low. Sophie approached me in the hallway, her usual defiance replaced with something closer to desperation. "Mark, can I talk to you?" I raised an eyebrow. "Depends. Are you here to tell me I'm just some guy again?" She looked down, her cheeks flushing. "No, I'm sorry I said that. I didn't mean it. I was just mad. Mad because I asked you to help with the barbecue?" I asked, my voice calm but firm. She shifted awkwardly. "I don't know. We're used to you doing everything. I guess we took it for granted." I crossed my arms. "So now that the free ride's over, you suddenly remember how to apologize?" Her eyes filled with tears. "It's not like that. I really am sorry. I need help. Prom is next month, and Mom can't afford the dress, and I don't want to be the only one who doesn't go." I studied her for a moment. Part of me wanted to cave, to hand her the money and fix everything like I always had. But another part of me remembered the sting of her words. "I appreciate the apology, Sophie, but I'm not paying for your dress." Her face crumbled. "But I'm not punishing you," I said before she could argue. "I'm teaching you that actions have consequences. Maybe next time, You'll think twice before biting the hand that feeds you. She ran to her room, slamming the door behind her. Ethan wasn't far behind. 2 days later, he found me in the garage while I was working on my car. "Mark, can we talk?" I wiped my hands on a rag and leaned against the workbench. "Go ahead." I'm sorry for what I said," he mumbled, staring at the ground. "I didn't mean it. I was just mad because you were nagging us about the chairs, and I don't know. It just came out." I raised an eyebrow. "So it was my fault for asking you to help with the barbecue?" "No. I don't know. It was stupid, okay? I didn't mean it." I folded my arms. "You know, Ethan, I've been in your life since you were 7. I've done my best to be a father to you, teaching you how to ride a bike, helping with your homework, cheering you on at every soccer game. I've sacrificed time, money, and energy to give you the best life I could. And you threw it all back in my face with 5 little words. You're not my real dad." His shoulders slumped. "I know. I screwed up. But can you please pay for the tournament? It's my last season before college, and scouts are going to be there. This could be my chance to get a scholarship." I wanted to say yes. God, I wanted to. I knew how much soccer meant to him. But if I gave in now, what lesson would he learn? That he could say whatever he wanted as long as I paid the bills? "I'm sorry, Ethan," I said quietly. But no, his face fell. "Please, I'll do anything." "No," I repeated. "You need to understand that words have consequences. Maybe next time, you'll think before you speak." Lisa tried to convince me to change my mind. She begged, she pleaded, she even cried. But I stood firm. "They need to learn, Lisa. If I bail them out now, they'll never respect me or anyone else for what they do." She wiped her eyes, her shoulders shaking with silent sobs. "But they're just kids. They're teenagers," I interrupted, "old enough to know better." The days that followed were tense. Sophie barely spoke to me, and Ethan couldn't even look me in the eye. Meals were eaten in silence, and the house felt colder than it ever had before. But then, something changed. One evening, I heard the sound of dishes clinking in the kitchen. I walked in to find Sophie washing the plates and Ethan drying them. "What's going on?" I asked cautiously. "We're helping Mom with the dishes," Sophie mumbled. I raised an eyebrow. Voluntarily, Ethan glanced at me, his cheeks tinged pink. "Yeah, we figured we should start pulling our weight." For the first time in weeks, I felt a flicker of hope. Over the next few days, the change became more noticeable. Ethan started mowing the lawn without being asked. Sophie offered to babysit the neighbor's kids to earn extra money for her prom dress. They still weren't perfect. There were plenty of eye rolls and half-hearted grumbles. But the entitlement was slowly being replaced by something I hadn't seen in a long time: responsibility. Lisa noticed it too. One night, as we sat on the porch watching the sunset, she reached over and squeezed my hand. "You were right," she whispered. "They needed this." I squeezed her hand back, my chest swelling with a mix of pride and relief. I just wanted them to understand the value of what they have, to appreciate what's given to them. But just when I thought things were finally turning around, life threw one last curveball. Because karma wasn't done with us yet. And the fallout that came next? Yeah, none of us saw that coming. If you've ever wondered whether karma has a sense of humor, let me tell you, it absolutely does. Just when I thought things were settling down, life threw us one final curveball. And this time, it hit harder than any of us expected. 2 weeks after Ethan and Sophie started stepping up around the house, things were better. Not perfect, but better. Ethan had started applying for part-time jobs to help cover his soccer expenses, and Sophie was babysitting every weekend to save up for her prom dress. I wasn't throwing money at every problem anymore, and for the first time in years, the kids were learning what it meant to earn what they wanted. But then Lisa dropped a bombshell. "Mark," she said one evening after dinner, her voice hesitant. "We need to talk." I set down my coffee mug, sensing the tension in her voice. "What's going on?" She twisted her hands nervously. I've been talking to my ex." For a moment, I couldn't process what she'd just said. "Your ex?" I repeated slowly. "Their dad," she clarified. "Jason." I stared at her, my pulse picking up speed. "What?" She took a deep breath. After everything that happened with Ethan and Sophie, I reached out to him. I thought maybe hearing from their biological dad might help them understand how lucky they are to have you in their lives. I leaned back in my chair, my mind racing. Jason, the man who'd walked out of their lives when they were toddlers and hadn't looked back since. The man who never sent birthday cards, never called on holidays, never paid a dime in child support. That Jason? And I asked, my voice tighter than I intended. Lisa hesitated. He wants to see them. I stared at her, waiting for the punchline that never came. You're kidding, right? I know it's complicated. Complicated? I cut her off. Lisa, that man abandoned his kids. He vanished for 10 years without so much as a phone call. And now, after everything I've done for them, he suddenly wants to play dad. I know, she said, her eyes pleading, but the kids deserve to know where they come from. Maybe this will help them appreciate what they have. I rubbed my hands over my face, trying to push down the anger bubbling in my chest. And what did Ethan and Sophie say? They're excited, she admitted, her voice soft. Of course they were. The man who was nothing more than a distant memory had suddenly become a shiny new toy, one they were eager to unwrap. A week later, Jason showed up at our house. I opened the door to find him standing on the porch, looking far too confident for a man who'd ghosted his own children. Tall, well-dressed, with a smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Mark, he said, holding out his hand like we were old friends. I stared at it for a moment before shaking it briefly. Jason, thanks for letting me come by, he said as I stepped aside to let him in. Wasn't my idea, I muttered under my breath. The kids rushed into the room the moment they saw him. Dad, Ethan grinned, clapping him on the back. Hey, champ. Jason ruffled his hair like they'd been hanging out every weekend for the past decade. Hi, Dad. Sophie hugged him tightly, her eyes shining with excitement. I stood back, watching the scene unfold like I was the outsider in my own home. The weeks that followed were difficult, to say the least. Jason became a regular presence in the kids' lives, showing up for soccer games, taking Sophie shopping for her prom dress, and suddenly playing the role of doting father as if the past 10 years had never happened. And the worst part? Ethan and Sophie were eating it up. Dad's taking me to the mall this weekend, Sophie announced one evening, her voice bubbling with excitement. Yeah, and he's coming to my tournament next month, Ethan added with a grin. I forced a smile that didn't quite reach my eyes. That's great. But inside, it felt like a knife twisting in my chest. Then came the moment when karma decided to make its grand entrance. It was a Saturday morning, and I was in the garage when I overheard Ethan and Sophie talking in the kitchen. Their voices were low, but not low enough. Did Dad say when he's taking us to the theme park? Sophie asked. Yeah, next weekend, Ethan replied. But we need to bring our own money for tickets. Sophie frowned. Wait, I thought he was paying for it. Nah, he said he's a little short this month. Something about some business deal falling through. So we have to pay for everything. Guess so. I'll use my paycheck from the pizza place, but it kind of sucks. There it was. The first crack in the shiny facade. Over the next few weeks, the cracks kept growing. Jason, it turned out, was great at making promises, but not so great at keeping them. The theme park trip got canceled. Then he bailed on one of Ethan's soccer games because of work stuff. Sophie's shopping trip for accessories fell through because he forgot about it. Slowly but surely, the excitement in their eyes began to fade. And I just watched, waiting for the moment when reality would finally sink in. That moment came sooner than I expected. It was a Friday evening when Ethan stormed into the house, his face flushed with anger. Mom, where's Dad? He demanded. Lisa looked up from the kitchen table, startled. He was supposed to pick you up from practice, wasn't he? Yeah, but he never showed. I waited for an hour, and he wouldn't answer his phone. I had to call Coach for a ride home. Before Lisa could respond, Sophie appeared in the doorway, her eyes red from crying. He canceled prom, too. Said he couldn't afford it after buying new golf clubs. I stood in the doorway, silently watching as the realization hit them both like a ton of bricks. He promised. Ethan muttered, clenching his fists. He said he'd be there. I know. Honey, Lisa said, her voice soft with sympathy. No, Ethan shouted, his voice cracking. He always does this. He shows up, acts like everything's great, and then disappears when it matters. I should have known better. Sophie wiped her eyes, her shoulders shaking. I thought he cared this time. I stepped forward, my heart aching for both of them despite everything that had happened. Ethan, Sophie, they both looked up, their eyes wide with guilt. And something else, something closer to regret. I know you're hurting, I said gently. And I know you've been let down. But maybe now, you understand why I've always been so hard on you. Why I wanted you to learn to appreciate what you have. Ethan swallowed hard. We screwed up, didn't we? I paused for a moment before answering. You made mistakes. We all do. But what matters is what you learn from them. Sophie stepped forward hesitantly. Mark, I'm sorry. For what I said. For everything. I know you're not just some guy Mom married. You're the only dad we've ever really had. Her voice broke on the last word, and before I knew it, she was hugging me tightly. I wrapped my arms around her, feeling the weight of the past 10 years lift just a little. Ethan stepped closer, awkward but sincere. Yeah, me too. I was a jerk. You've always been there, and I never really appreciated it. I'm sorry. I clapped a hand on his shoulder, pulling him into the hug. Later that night, as I stood outside with Lisa, watching the sunset, she reached for my hand. I guess it took losing something to make them see what they had all along, she said softly. Yeah, I agreed, my chest feeling lighter than it had in months. Sometimes, life has a way of teaching the lessons we can't. And you? She asked, tilting her head to look at me. Do you regret stepping back? I thought about it for a moment, then shook my head. No, it hurt like hell, but it was the only way they could learn. And maybe now, we can finally be the family we were meant to be. So yeah, Reddit. Sometimes, walking away is the only way to make people realize your worth. And sometimes, when you come back, they're finally ready to appreciate what they almost lost. The end.